Queensland branch of the AIG would like to welcome all attendees to today's RPGeo e-forum series, and the topic this week is hydrogeology. Let's get going. So today's topic is hydrogeology. I'd like to thank Chris Dickinson, Katarina David and Andrew Hovey for participating. Chris has over 26 years of experience as a geologist and over 22 as a consulting hydrogeologist in the Asia Pacific and Canada regions. His experience includes hydrogeological conceptualization, dewatering, design and water control, borefield development, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I won't go through them all. He's successfully led numerous multidisciplinary geoscience and engineering teams on major projects, and has also fulfilled senior managerial roles with Klein Krippenberger, including Vice President of the Australasian operations. He's also completed competent independent reviews and expert witness services, and has been involved in the forensic review of 2 tailings dam failures, which I suspect was less than fun. He completed his Bachelor of Applied Science in Geology and Hydrology from the University of Ballarat and University of Melbourne, and is a member of the AIG, IAH, AusIMF. Dr. Katarina David is a registered RPGeo hydrologist with over 22 years experience in groundwater management. She's worked on mining, infrastructure, agriculture and residential development projects, mostly in New South Wales and Queensland. Her work experience in government, research, teaching, consulting in Australia, New Zealand and Europe has enabled her to gain a broad understanding of different groundwater issues. Katarina completed her Masters at UTS and a PhD in hydrogeology at the University of New South Wales, and went on to complete a postdoc in the same field. She's Vice President of the New South Wales IAH, a board member of the AIG, and President of the New South Wales AIG branch. And our third panel member, Andrew Hovey, who's also with Klein Krippenberger, is a hydrologist with broad international experience. He's experienced in site investigation, interpretation, analysis, hydrogeological conceptualization, which isn't easy to say, probably harder to do as well, and numerical modelling. His work has included assessments for open pits, underground operations, block caves, tailing residues, storage facilities, water storage dams, and the like. In recent years, Andrew's focus has been managing large mine engineering design projects in developing parts of Europe and Asia. This has included detailed design of one of the largest lined waste residue storage facilities in the world. He received his Bachelor of Science in Geoscience with honours from the University of Queensland, and is a member of the AIG and the AIH. So welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. So let's get on to these questions. I'll start off with Katarina. You're first on my list, so let's start with you. Can you provide some experience-based advice or tell an old war story that new professionals entering the industry might benefit from?
That is a difficult question, actually. But I think for me, it was a lot of learning from others, learning how to do things and how not to do things. Also, I think what I would recommend to anyone getting serious in the hydrogeology is to get some more training. Nowadays, there's no real undergraduate hydrogeology degree. So typically a person would enter workforce and then get trained by some company. But I think the real value is then to get some more training, like something practical, like a master's course, or even just an outside course to providers, on certain topics. And I think just being interested in what you're doing, just reading a lot, finding out, and going to as many different hydrogeology areas that one can possibly, go into, just to see what is it that you really want and like to do. And then also something probably more from the field perspective is always really listen to local people, and because they've got a lot of knowledge of the area that you're working in, and you usually have very little when you arrive to a site. And then don't always take everything for granted, but make your own opinion based on what people tell you and what your own observations are. So that's sort of couple of things from me in terms of what I would recommend someone who's just starting based on the experience.
Thanks, Katarina. Chris, what about yourself?
Yeah, a similar sort of a story, I guess, Peter. I had my heart set on hydrogeology way back in my undergraduate days, but I entered industry in the early '90s when there was almost no jobs around, and we had to hunt scratch pretty hard to find work. My first 2 years in industry was in the oil and gas field as a mudlogger, and then I spent a year in at the back of Meekatharra on an exploration gold rig. At the time, I was a little bit frustrated with the early direction my career had taken, and I didn't really appreciate the value of that experience until much later. I made the conscious decision to leave the WA industry when gold was smashing through the $300 an ounce barrier. Went back to uni, got an upgrade to my degree, and then I became a hydrogeologist after that. And it wasn't until quite a few years later that I'd realised that all those metres of logging, of core, of RC chips, of RAB chips, all the field mapping actually created a very, very strong foundation for the hydrogeology work I'd later do. So definitely, if you're not getting into what it is that you want to do at the start, just get as much value out of it as you possibly can, because it's all good experience.
Thanks, Chris. Andrew, is your experience similar, or do you find different experiences?
That's definitely relevant, Peter. What Chris and Katarina have said. You know, in everything you do, as long as you learn something out of it, even if it's not what you want to progress with, it's beneficial. So take that out of it. I guess a bit of a war story from me. One of my very first real hydrogeology projects was implementing a pumping system down in Pottsville in northern New South Wales. In the early days of my career of hydrogeology, I was working on my own and didn't have a mentor. So I guess the first piece of advice is get yourself a mentor. It makes life a lot easier and saves learning things the hard way. But long and the short of it, my boss had promised that we'd get 2 litres a second to pump into the sewage system of a new development, and basically threw me the problem, and I had to figure it out on my own, which was, you know, a lot of hard work. But really, I guess the rewards from doing things the hard way and getting your hands dirty in the field and you know, learning along the way was very, very beneficial to me in my career, and I learned a hell of a lot in a very short time. So that's I guess one piece of advice, as well as, like I said before, get a mentor. And I guess another learning from that for me in terms of experience was how you recover from those problems is really what sets you apart in terms of your reputation and your ability. So, you know, I could have given up and gone, this is too hard, and walked away. But, you know, I knew I had this problem in front of me that someone had to solve, and through perseverance, it all worked out well in the end. So, yeah, I guess long and the short of it is be the person that sticks through and solves the problems to the end, and really it starts to set you apart in your career.
Thanks, Andrew. That sounds like some great advice there. Chris, you started as a geologist and then hydrogeology. Was the experience starting off similar in both, or very different?
Very different, actually. When I started in geology, it was very much a case of that I'd be handed an inch-thick journal to read about how the logging codes and the practices were at each site that I actually worked on. And I really had to adapt my logging experience and skills to those sorts of approaches. Whereas when I entered the hydrogeology field, it was more so about understanding the overall problem in the first place, and then determining what the solution might be. It sounds like a subtle difference, but it's actually quite a different way of thinking about getting to the root cause of a problem. And it's I like that about consulting, and I like that about hydrogeology, and that you can't go in and just look at an element of a project. You've got to understand as much of it as you possibly can.
Okay, thanks, Chris. We'll start with Andrew on this one, I think. Hydrogeology can be described as a blend of geology, mathematics, chemistry, environmental science, and engineering. Is such a wide range of content a blessing for diversity or a recipe for disaster?
Well, that's a good question. I think in the right hands, it's a blessing for diversity, but you know, it takes a special type of person to be able to bring all those elements together and make it work. And I think those of us in the industry who are good hydrogeologists can do that. I think in the wrong hands, it can be a bit of a recipe for disaster though. So if you don't have a bit of a worldly approach and you just want to look at it through a engineering focus or the like, I think it can really affect the end result of what you want to achieve as a hydrogeologist, and doesn't really deliver the best outcome at the end of the day. So for me personally, I think it's a blessing for diversity, but I can see how it could go the other way too. And I've seen sort of real examples of that over time.
Thanks, Andrew. Katarina, is that your experience?
Well, my background is in geology, but I actually love working in a team where people come from different backgrounds, like chemistry or biology or physics, you know, where they bring sort of, you know, modeling or ecology or hydrogeochemistry into it. And I think it's great if you work in that environment. Not that one person, if I think it's very difficult to find a person who's good at absolutely everything and has this in-depth knowledge of all of these disciplines. But I think it's great if you work in a team. We've done a project looking at some lake system. We arrived there and, you know, we had absolutely no idea what was going on. And I was just thinking at that moment, looking at this whole vast lake system, like, wouldn't it be great to have an ecologist there with us to help us understand how this system recharges and discharges, and how you know, the plants and trees that we are seeing on the side, how deep are the roots, how much demand do they have for water, because that would help us understand something before we even before we do any geophysics or put any, you know, instrumentation in the ground. So I just think it's great what other skills can bring to hydrogeology, other backgrounds.
Thanks, Katarina. Chris, is a jack of all trades approach, or is it better to be a little bit more savvy in one of those fields, or yeah, maybe pick two or three?
I think my career has actually swung and changed over the last 25 years. Certainly when I entered the industry in the mid-90s, it was common practice for a hydrogeologist to undertake all of these elements of a project. So it would be geology, it would be numerical modelling, it would be the environmental science and the permitting and the approvals and the impact assessments, sometimes the engineering. It really was a case that was just the role of the hydrogeologist 25 years ago. And when I started my career, you know, I did water chemistry work, I did modelling work, as I said, I did quite a lot of it, but my focus and my strength, I think, was really in geology and in what I call pure and applied hydrogeology. So understanding flow systems and being able to translate that into something that a modeler or a geochemist might be able to use. The longer my career's gone on, the more comfortable I am in that pure and applied role, and the more reliant I've become on other people to bring the expertise, such as the geochemistry or the numerical modelling. And I think Katarina's absolutely spot on there, where you get a great deal of personal satisfaction when you're contributing to a team of like-minded professionals rather than trying to attempt to do the work all yourself. And I think it's a better outcome for everybody if professionals recognise where their strengths lie, leverage as much as they can from those strengths, and where the need arises, get assistance and support from other people who have their own skill sets. So I think the natural career direction that I've taken is one that the wiser I get, the more I realise what I don't know. And I'm quite happy just doing the pure and applied stuff.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's certainly something I learned in my career, being most comfortable when I knew what I knew and knew what I didn't know. So let's move on. Andrew, this one I think I'll kick you off on. What has kept you engaged and interested in hydrogeology?
I guess two aspects. On the, I guess I'm blessed from being in consulting that I get to travel the world and interact with a lot of different people and different sites and the like. So really that aspect of it is something that's very much appealed to me, just that the opportunities it's given me, and to take that learning and take it to other parts of the world and apply it. From a technical standpoint, I guess I'd say that every site's unique, and you really don't know what's there until you start to delve into the subsurface and have a good look at it. And even then, sometimes you can do all the desk work and whatnot in the world, and you get out there and you drill a hole and find something completely different. So I think that sort of mysterious aspect of it, and the challenges that brings, is something that's really appealed to me and kept it interesting, rather than just being a crank the handle cookie cutter type of role.
Katarina, what about yourself?
I absolutely love what I do. I love the challenges. I love the problem solving. I think similar to what Andrew said, I like the diversity. Every job is different. Even if it's in the same geology, it's different because it's a different problem that you're trying to solve. And we always, whenever you're presented with a problem, you always say, like, what are we actually trying to solve? What is actually the question here? Because there might be so many things that are unknown, but you're actually only trying to solve one issue. And also the fact that you can work in many different countries, that you can, you get to go and meet people, not only other hydrogeologists, but also people on the ground. It's wonderful to. I actually love doing field work as well. So just because you learn a lot from just talking to people who have been in the area for quite a while and know about waters in their area. So the challenges and the problem solving, I think, has kept me really interested in hydrogeology.
Thanks, Katarina. And Chris, what's kept you happy and engaged?
I agree with both Andrew and Katarina. Firstly, the diversity, and I think it's provided a bit of a buffer times too, because I can certainly backtrack my career, and I might have worked a few years in coal projects, and then the coal price fell off, or the coal industry fell off, and then you find yourself working in Mount Isa or New Guinea, and then you move around essentially to where the commodities are being progressed into new projects, and that's where all the work is. So I think both having diversity in project work has kept me interested, but it's also acted as a bit of a project buffer for lean times. I think the other thing that's really kept me engaged and interested is sort of touches on what I was talking about before. And the more people I work with of different technical backgrounds, and the more you tend to appreciate the skill set experience needed to get these other technical backgrounds to work. It's really quite engaging, I think, to understand that type of work. And then when it all comes together, when you've got a multidisciplinary project and you've got geoscientists talking with environmentalists and engineers, it just works really well, and you get a great sense of satisfaction at seeing an end product that's pulled all those different types of resources together.
Thanks, Chris. Is it fair to say that hydrogeology has experienced a heightened sense of awareness and recognition in recent years through increased focus on water management practices and development of hydrogeology intensive industries such as Queensland CSG? Who'd like to kick that one off? Chris?
Sure. I think it has. I think there's a whole lot of reasons why there's a greater awareness on hydrogeology. Obviously, the development of the Queensland coal seam gas industry over the last decade or so has been very eye-opening. It came from a period of great uncertainty from practices overseas that were highly publicised for a whole number of reasons. And what that did for the Queensland example, I think, is it brought a microscope to the work that was being done right from the offset. And the companies that developed coal seam gas in Queensland invested in hydrogeology teams, and as did the Queensland government. So there was a lot of scrutiny and a lot of investigative work that was done at the front end. I think as you look at the industry now that it's well and truly into its mature production stage, I think the learnings that we've gathered out of that, the understanding of basinal hydrogeology across the Surat Basin, and the understanding of how that industry might evolve elsewhere has been very, very beneficial from a hydrogeology perspective. And paralleling all that, of course, is prolonged periods of drought and increased stress on water resources. You've got a competing industry there for hydrogeology professionals to look after groundwater resources, Great Artesian Basin or big alluvium systems like the Condamine. So I think it's been a fairly healthy market over the last 10 years to increase the awareness of and the skill set of hydrogeologists. It's certainly been a fairly fast ride for those of us who've been in it.
And Katarina, what about your experience in this?
Yeah, and probably not, I agree fully with Chris, but not only gas, mining has definitely, resulted in a lot of developments in hydrogeology. And I think big, mining projects where you couldn't just complete an EIS with, a standard, with just using the standard hydrogeology tools, but now you had to, use tracers, or you had to apply, different hydrogeology techniques which weren't used before. Then the introduction of independent expert scientific committee, which then, brought in a lot of requirements and regulations and sort of different research that came out of their work, and also a lot of recommendations that they've come up with. And then the introduction of the expert panels for, different mine sites, which also has then resulted in a lot more stringent work in hydrogeology in particular areas like geochemistry or geomechanics, which were never looked at before. So yes, I think it's definitely progressed significantly, but not only those big projects, it was also on the a state basis, like New South Wales introduced the water sharing plans in the last 20 years and started, progressively introducing different areas and water sharing plans for different areas. So that has also, put a lot of requirements for hydrogeology work in that area to look independently on, where is the, if you are, taking water from some source, how is that going to impact groundwater in different areas, and is it going to draw it, and how much of the water is coming from the surface water, and then you're looking at surface water groundwater interaction. So it has resulted in a lot more work, and I think more importance has been put onto hydrogeology profession.
Thanks, Katarina. And Andrew, have you seen the same heightened awareness?
Yeah, I think Peter, it's been a gradually increasing thing over many years, and there's a realization the more users there are, and more reliance there is on groundwater, and recognition that it's a resource, as well as in conjunction with that, the science catching up. That the innate value of groundwater is better recognised. So there's a need, like anything, to manage it appropriately, such that it's available for all and for future generations as well. I think also a big change probably in the last 20 years or so with the states and how they manage water is starting to assign effectively dollar values and I guess licenses and whatnot to volumetric takes of water is really starting to quantify it as a resource and really causing the science to play catch up, like I said before, as well. You need to understand it closely to be able to manage it appropriately, and as Katarina said, that also brings into play all the different related disciplines like geochemistry and the like. So certainly my experience is it has been. I think particularly in Australia, my experience in Australia is that it's a very, in general, well-managed resource compared perhaps to some places overseas where, you know, reliance on groundwater isn't so necessary, and in those places it's perhaps not given the attention it deserves like it is down here.
Thanks, Andrew. Just following on that a little bit further, I mean, it's a waste product for some and a resource for others, and you can be engaged to look at it from either side. Is there a potential conflict there, or is it something that's easy enough to manage?
Ooh, I think it can be hard to manage, particularly when it comes to, you know, for example, in the coal seam gas industry, you know, they're pulling water out as part of their gas production, and then they're also generating it as a waste product, and trying to put it back into the ground sounds simple, but very tricky to do. So I think there are challenges there, and you know, ultimately the economics underlie all of it. So, you know, I think it's a real challenge to get that balance and recognise the innate value of it as a resource.
Peter, if I could add to Andrew's answer on that, that's a good question. I think, you know, that's the type of thing that really highlights good water management practice on mining sites versus just getting a solution to the nearest problem. Solving whole of mine site water issues is becoming more and more common as a requirement for hydrogeologists, and hydrogeologists have to work with numerical modelers, with geochemists, with surface water engineers, civil engineers, and with the mine waste stream as well, whether that be tailings or a water waste, whatever the case may be. Mining companies more and more are moving, or have moved already, towards a far more ethical position where their water management is definitely a whole of site approach, and securing a water supply in balance with water consumption and with water production as a waste product. Those three elements tend to interplay a lot more than they did 10 or 20 years ago. And I think that's highlighted not only the role that a hydrogeologist has played, but certainly some of those other specialist fields as well, particularly geochemistry, which is, you know, when I started, hydrogeologists used to do all the geochemistry. There's no way I'd do that now, now that I know what the complexity of geochemistry is. But they're the types of skill sets that lead towards solutions that are whole of site, rather than just trying to fix one problem whilst another one is sitting in the background.
Thanks, Chris. Katarina, have you had a similar experience in New South Wales, or is it a little different?
Yeah, I just thought I should add about infrastructure. You know, like previously in the past, anything that had to do anything with water, any problems with water, they would just, you know, geotech people would solve it, and that was good enough. But now it's not good enough anymore, and you actually do require a high level, you know, solution to some of the problems on site. And as Chris said, like overall site, look at the overall site balance, like what's coming out, what's coming in, how can you make it more, not profitable, but more, how can you make the whole process such that there's no losses actually to the system, so that what you gain, you're not actually exporting off the site, and you actually can manage somehow on site. whether, you know, it'd be re-injection or whether it'd be treatment or something else.
Okay, thanks, Katarina. A little bit more than just plumbing. Let's get on to the next one. Obviously, water and tailings has become a big issue in the community, and it's often a stumbling block in new mine approvals or mine expansions. At what stage of the process should a hydrogeologist be engaged?
At the start. We all, sorry. We just always tell people, you know, whenever they are even thinking about drilling an exploration hole, can you please just put a pipe down if you're drilling a hole, and, you know, we'll come and help you install it, and then we'll teach you what to do, and you can do it. It'll be really very small cost to you, but the benefit of us having the data later on is just, you know, immense. So just starting really, really early is a really good thing to do. So and similar, tailings is usually ongoing thing, and the mine closure, but yeah, water is usually starting early and going through the whole cycle.
Thanks, Katarina. Chris, CSG, similar sort of process right at the beginning?
Yeah, I think all industries should look at it this way. Hydrogeologists tend to think in time on a logarithmic scale, because that's how we analyse all of our pumping tests. And a good analogy is if you get up front and understand the problem at the start and develop a workable solution, you can usually get on top of it fairly early. But if you don't, and the problem escalates, recovery of a situation can take you a logarithmic timescale longer than fixing it in the first instance. And certainly I'm seeing that type of front-end thinking a lot more in project development. And it's not just mining, and it's not just coal seam gas, it's also longer-term water resource development for water supply purposes. It's just, I think the heightened awareness of what hydrogeologists do when our work is done well, and the value it brings to projects, just means that we do tend to get involved more at the front end of projects. And as Katarina says, we also play a much greater role in ongoing operational performance, where we're looking at whole of asset performance and annual reports and whatever the case may be. So as early as possible and as frequently as possible, and think of time and cost in a logarithmic scale.
Thanks, Chris. And Andrew, is it a case of the hydrogeologist should be more involved in consultation with the public as well, or is that something that should be left to the mine management themselves? Obviously, as experts, you'd have a better idea.
Yeah, in terms of the consultation with the public part of it, that's certainly something that you know, it requires a certain skill set in its own right, and I guess as we've talked about throughout this exercise, you know, having a hydrogeo in an advisory capacity is a good idea, but sometimes the experts who deal with that are the ones who are best placed to manage the direct interface, sometimes with the scientists in the shadows. But I guess to answer the question specifically there, and I completely agree with Chris and Katarina in terms of getting engaged at the beginning. You know, I can count on more than one hand the number of times I've worked on projects where, you know, all right, we've designed the mine and everything's ready to go, and by the way, we need a water supply, and you know, you hate to be the bringer of bad news, but it's not always a simple solution or a cheap solution. So ultimately, getting someone involved in the early stages saves you money. So think of it as a bit of an insurance policy, I think, is the way to view it.
I think, Peter, just to add to Andrew's, just I think the community, I think that there should be a hydrogeologist in any community consultation. I think it brings a lot of additional knowledge to the problem. It helps the community understand what it is about. We did, you know, several community sessions for a project that we did for my side, and if you can of a normal person and explain what is it that, you know, you're going to do and how this is going to turn out, and in just simple terms, present what the potential impacts might be, I think it really is very, very helpful to the community if you can get that across, rather than, I think, someone who's in trained in communication. Of course, it depends on the person as well, but in my experience, I think bringing a scientist to the community consultation has been very, very good and very helpful.
Okay, thanks for that, Katarina. Sorry? Oh.
No, that's all.
Sorry. So where do you think the hydrogeology industry could improve or change for the better? And is this change achievable? I might kick off with you this time, Chris.
Sure. I think we should always be looking to improve. That's the consulting answer. But the reality is, I think there's been massive steps forward in certain areas of the hydrogeology field. And to me, for example, groundwater modelling, if you look at groundwater modelling now compared to what it was 20 years ago, it's a totally different beast. The amount of time it takes to run a model really hasn't changed. They still run in hours to days. So all the computing power that's been gained over the last 2 decades has been invested in more complexity, more detail, more analysis, all the bits and pieces that make groundwater models the wonderful and frustrating beasts that they are. In terms of how we can improve or change for the better, I'd just like to see all the elements of hydrogeology moving at the same sort of pace. So, as I said, I'm a pure and applied hydrogeologist, so my passion is really in the front end geological interpretation of groundwater flow systems, understanding heads and pressures and flow directions and interactions. And I think where we as an industry are at the suffering point of a reducing number of graduates coming through the system, and what that is meaning is we're seeing less and less geological graduates, pure geological graduates, moving into the field of hydrogeology. It's not necessarily a bad thing for the industry, but we want to be pushing the realms of our abilities in all areas of hydrogeology. And I would really like to see more geologists, more core geologists, and more people who are passionate about that primary science getting back into hydrogeology and helping make sure that the conceptualizations that feed into the modelling assessments are as good as they can possibly be.
Thanks, Chris. Andrew, what are your thoughts on improvements?
Yeah, I agree with Chris's comments. One thing I'd probably add, and for me personally, as I mentioned at the start, getting out there at the start of your career in particular, getting your hands dirty and seeing things in the field is a huge advantage in terms of developing learning. And that can, not just true of hydrogeology, but any discipline related to the subsurface, be it geophysics or exploration, geology or the like. So I think, more and more as things go on, there's been a bit of a drift away from that in some instances, but to try and really put the value on that front end field aspect of careers is really, to me, invaluable, and ultimately seeing things and solving problems in the field sets you up to be a better hydrogeologist. So just recognizing the innate value of that, I think, is something that we could perhaps do a little better. Is it achievable? I think so, but economics is always the hard sell there. So it might require some investment and learnings along the way for the next generation. So that's my thoughts on that one.
Thanks, Andrew. And Katarina, your thoughts on improvements?
I think training. I think what Chris said about geology and, a lot of schools at universities, geology schools have closed and no longer teach geology. Hydrogeology is not taught as an undergraduate degree at all. And a lot of, master's courses for someone who has, say, completed a geology degree to go and do hydrogeology have also closed. So there's only a handful or a couple actually of schools in Australia which still teach hydrogeology on a postgraduate level. So there's not a lot of people that come out of, you know, universities that have got degrees, you know, and it is not, hydrogeology is not a trade. It's not something that you can learn. I mean, you can learn a job, but it takes a really long time. And also, in addition to that, I think fieldwork, starting with Andrew said, starting with fieldwork and having someone to show you what to do. And I've started similar to Andrew, being thrown into deep end, but I think it would have really helped. It would have been really beneficial if I had someone to show me, and or like if the course that, you know, if the course had some field component where you were taught on how to do a pumping test, or, you know, how to do geophysics, how to sample, you know, all of those things that you actually nowadays learn on the job, and most of the times you learn on your own because there's not many people that have time to invest in you to help you do that. In particular in consulting. So I think training is a big thing, and especially with geology background.
Thanks, Katarina. You mentioned you know, some of the universities now getting rid of even geology undergraduates, and that no one university has hydrogeology as an undergraduate degree. Do you think then there's a role for organisations like the AIG and IAH and others to lobby the universities? Bearing in mind, of course, you know, University of Newcastle, it sounds like they've now gotten rid of undergraduate geology.
Yes.
Can it be changed, or is it too late?
I think in hydrogeology there's I think the reason why they have closed the postgraduate degree in hydrogeology, and the reason why they're closing undergraduate in geology is the funding. And I don't know how to resolve that, but I know that there's been, you know, some courses that have been organised through, you know, Flinders University and in New South Wales, and through IAH and the AIG, we've been trying to, you know, organise courses for people to, you know, get better at, you know, in different areas. But it's difficult because we are both voluntary, like both IAH and AIG are voluntary organisations. So you need to really give up 3 or 4 days of your time, and you need to have a site to, you know, do this work. Like if you want to show someone how to do the pumping test, or how to do, you know, geophysics and yeah. So I don't know what the solution is, but I only see that the AIG and the IH can actually help in conducting short courses to help people who are already in the industry or in the consulting, to help them train.
Thanks, Katarina. I'll start this one with Andrew. Each of you are members of the AIG and have gained the RPGeo accreditation in hydrogeology. How important is the RPGeo accreditation for your career?
Look, I think it's very important, Peter. It's a recognition that you are a certified professional in that area. It's something that you have to work towards. So, you know, it's not just a membership or something like that. So, to me personally, it's something that you know, like I said, I've had to work towards, and I think that there's certainly been some projects and situations where it has carried weight. I'm thinking of one project in particular in Europe, which happened to be for a Canadian company, where that accreditation was recognised under their equivalent of the JORC code. So that in its own right held its weight there. So look, I think it's something that's very important, even though it's not at this stage a requirement for certain things, as it is perhaps in you know, exploration geology for the hydrogeology field. But it's something that I think for me personally, and for those that recognise the value in it, it's something that carries immense weight.
Thanks, Andrew. And Chris, for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I looked at that last sentence. How important is the RPGeo accreditation for your career? I could argue that it hasn't impacted my career at all, but that's not why I became an RPGeo. Hydrogeology is one of those sciences that has badly in the past. And by that I mean, until recent years, there was general sentiment that hydrogeology was a nuisance science that could be done by anybody who had the spare time to do it. And this is going back a long time. I'm not being critical of recent times. And as a consequence of that, there are a lot of legacy issues. There are contaminated sites all over the world. There are issues with groundwater supplies. There are issues with drinking water supplies. There are issues with contaminated sites. So when I look at the RPG accreditation, it's not something that I sought to push my career. It's something that I believe we need to move towards to heighten the relevance of hydrogeology and allow people to know that if you're hiring a hydrogeologist with an RPGeo accreditation, they bring a certain amount of experience and capability to the problem. It's what they do for their career. It's what they've invested their time in. So to me, although I started this rant off with, it hasn't really affected my career, this is one of the most important things to my career because I have a passion and an invested future in hydrogeology, and I want to see the best science done that can possibly be done. And I would encourage, and I've just written a brief article in the AIG news about this, I'd encourage anybody who's in the hydrogeology field who feels the same way to look at an accreditation process such as this to help raise the profile of what we do as professionals.
Well said, Chris. Thank you. Katarina, yourself?
I also think it is really, really important, both personally and on a professional level. We are not required to have to be registered as hydrogeologists, but we, as Andrew and Chris have said, that we don't. There's been some work done in the past, and as I said, geotech people have been doing groundwater work, and they just sometimes, different disciplines attempt to do the work and the work is not done properly. It not only carries the professional weight, it also carries the ethical weight. I think that's an important aspect of it too. And I also would, push for more RPGeo certification. Definitely, we have been lobbying through the IIH, and I think I'm not sure if this statistics is still valid for this year, but hydrogeologists made the biggest percentage of RPGeos in the AIG, which is really great to know. So it does stand for something, and it's just the self-recognition and also recognition between your peers. And it'd be great if we could push for, employers to recognize this certification. It requires you to continue learning. It requires you to keep on reading and, getting new knowledge. So I think it's really important from professional, personal, ethical, reasons. And also with the new laws introduced, you already have them in Queensland by now. New South Wales is also introducing, certification for engineers who can't do any work in New South Wales unless they are certified. Now, this would be great to add hydrogeology to the list of, people who have to be certified to do the work. So, yes, it does carry a big importance for me.
Thanks, Katarina. We'll get some questions from the ether now. We've got a couple of questions here. They're probably about the same, so I'll ask them together. One's from James Lorca and the other one's from Emmanuel Wembenu from Brisbane. Both about the difficulty getting from exploration geologist to hydrogeologist. James asks, how does one fill the skills gap to transition from exploration to hydrogeology? Any suggestions or suggested path or formal education seminars to be qualified? And Emmanuel asks, is mineral exploration experience without mathematical modelling relevant in hydrogeological work?
I can answer that if you like, Peter.
Yep, please go ahead, Chris.
I think I'm qualified to answer that because that's my life. I graduated from a university that had a national reputation for producing really good gold exploration geologists. And when I graduated, I went into, as I said, a mudlogging job, and then I went into gold exploration. For me, at that time, to transition across to hydrogeology, I had to do extra study. And as well as that extra study, and while I was doing that extra study, I had to invest time into the IAH. I had to find out who were the players in the groundwater industry, and ultimately, when I got my break, I had to move interstate to get the job. So certainly, the skills that you develop and the training that you get as an exploration geologist or a mine geologist or a structural geologist is absolutely relevant. But the step across to hydrogeology, it's a decision that you need to make because it does require some additional training. It does require some additional learning, as Katarina had suggested. And sometimes the opportunities are far fewer, but if it's what you want to do, then you've got to make those harder decisions and start to move your career in that direction. Okay, thanks, Chris. Another question from Michael Lego. In practical terms, how does a new graduate in the geoscience or a geoscientist seeking to change his or her field into hydrology break into hydrology? What is the current state of the market?
I can help with that. So typically our graduate would, like environmental science, typically environmental science, not many geologists that would actually go into hydrogeology nowadays, starting in a consulting company. So they would enter as a graduate in a consulting company. And then if, they had a hydrogeologist, or if they had interest in hydrogeology, they would possibly be paired with someone who might provide them with some training or help them with on-the-job training. But again, it does require some outside, to become a hydrogeologist, you do need to get some outside professional training, like courses and, masters or outside courses in, fractured rock, or Australian Groundwater School does, 4-day courses that cover a lot of aspects of hydrogeology and touch on all of those, so you can actually see whether that is something that interests you or not. And it's not like a huge investment, but at least if that is what you want to do in the end. So get typically through entering the market, the job market, and then getting a mentor and training.
Thanks, Katarina. Final question from the floor. Can you elaborate, this is from Tim Jones, can you elaborate how to get RPGeo accreditation? I can probably field that one. Number one, you have to be a member of the AIG. Number two, you have to apply through, there's an application form on the website, and I think you require a minimum of 5 years continuous experience in that specific field that you're seeking accreditation for. So it's a fairly, not particularly onerous application, but it is a rigorous application on the AIG end.
And so, Peter, and you have to 4 referees.
4 referees, yes, important,
yeah.
Very important. Thanks, Katarina. And final word before we wrap it all up. I'll start with Andrew. You've been quiet for a little while. What is one perception about hydrogeology that you would like to change, and why?
It's a tough one. I think that element of it, that it's a pseudoscience. I think there's still a small proportion of the industry out there that thinks that it's it's something that gets in the way, and it's not real science or real engineering if you happen to be from that bent. And in my career, the aha moment that's really come to light where that has changed for people is where you add value to, or you solve a problem for them that they think's easy, but they recognise from that process that hydrogeology is something real and tangible, and it requires specialised skills to do and practice. So that's probably my contribution, Peter.
Thank you, Andrew. And Katarina, what would you like to change?
I fully agree there with Andrew. It's a really wide perception that it's not a profession. It's something in between, that you're not an engineer and you're not a scientist. You're something in between, and you probably don't know much about anything. So I think that perception is something that I would really like to change, because we do spend a lot of time, learning about different things. And also we need to understand how the system works. And we had very, very little information on which we need to produce very realistic knowledge on, inflows or losses or something. So we've got very little to work with, and we've got to come up with high certainty within our results. So it is difficult to do, and it does require training and experience. So it is a full scientific discipline.
It's amazing what you can do with 2 data points. And finish off, Chris, what perception would you like to change?
I agree totally with what Katarina and Andrew said, but I think I might just say something a little bit different, and that is, I think the perception of what hydrogeology is needs to change at a much younger level. So we struggle to get geology graduates entering into a career in hydrogeology. I think we need to go right back to STEM subjects. We need to be treating hydrogeology, because of the value of groundwater as a resource in Australia, as equal as you would a surface water resource in Australia. And we need to introduce that STEM level of education right down to the primary school. Then when students are moving through secondary school, they actually see geology as a viable career option rather than something that's far off over the horizon. And I think just educating people that this is something that, nationally we need and environmentally we need, might encourage more people to move through the university system. And because universities are all about business now, the more people that come through, the more chance you've got of getting a decent intake and a decent career course offer. So I think education of the future professionals that are going to carry on from what we're doing is something I'd really like to change for the better.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, Chris. I'd like to take the opportunity now on behalf of the AIG and all the attendees to thank Chris, Katarina and Andrew for educating and entertaining. And special thanks to Chris for getting this all together and corralling everyone. So thanks very much. And I'd just like to say we'll hopefully see you all on the 14th of July for the next AIG ALS technical meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Cheers. See you all.